Thank you so much, Pastor Andrew. Again, I want to say good morning and welcome to each one of you. Special welcome if it happens to be your first time with us. We're so glad you've joined us. But whether you're in the room here, out on the patio, over in the coffee house, in the family room, or streaming from at home, wherever you are, however you might be joining us, we want to say welcome. We have been going through a study on the life of Joseph from the book of Genesis. This morning we reached the 40th chapter, and we're in verses 1 to 23, so I'd encourage you to open up your Bible or your Bible app there. And as you're turning there, this week I heard a story of how a food critic at a local TV station decided to go to several of the major fast food chains. Now, why would a food critic who's used to reviewing restaurants go to fast food chains? Well, he wanted to compare the pictures you see on the menus with what you actually get when you order the food at the restaurants. And he began his journey with breakfast at McDonald's. And he decided to start with something simple and order a hotcakes. On the left is a picture of what McDonald's shows in their advertising those hotcakes will look like. And on the right is what it looks like when you pick it up at the counter. I wonder, you notice any difference at all? Next up was Burger King, home of the Whopper, famous for offering a burger where you can have it your way. You know, hold the pickles, hold the lettuce, special orders don't upset us. All we ask is that you let us serve it your way. Okay, well, the only problem is when it comes to the ways you can have it, apparently you can't have it the way that it looks in their ad, because when you get the burger, that's what it looks like. Moving on over to Jack in the Box. If you're not aware of this, anytime the Dodger pitchers strike out 7 opposing batters, you get a free Jumbo Jack at participating area locations with the purchase of a large soft drink. But what if you don't want a Jumbo Jack? What if you're more in the mood for tacos? Well, if that's what you're craving, I've got good news, I've got bad news. The good news is that Jack's got your back when it comes to giving you tacos. The bad news is that not only aren't they free, they probably won't look exactly like what you saw in their ad. Maybe you feel like something altogether different. Maybe what you'd like is a bacon portobello mushroom melt. If so, Wendy's got what you're looking for, as long as you're not expecting it to look like it looks in their advertising. Now, I could spend the rest of the time this morning just ragging on fast food restaurants, but I'm going to stop with those 5 and leave you with just one more example, not from the world of fast food, but instead from the world of fine dining. Ever see an ad for canned soup and you think, that looks so good. Let's have that for dinner tonight. Problem is, no matter how you cook it up, it never looks quite so chock full of meat and vegetables as it did in the picture. And you try and try and try, and you wonder, what am I doing wrong? Do I not know how to cook? Do I maybe need a new stove? Is the problem me? Have I perhaps lost my marbles? Well, the fact is, you might be closer than you think.
They put marbles in a bowl before pouring Campbell's soup on top. Now, the liquid slid between the marbles, but the meat and vegetables sat on top of them, making the soup look thicker than it really was. They were ordered to stop by the government, and they enforced rules requiring all companies to stop staging and instead show the real product. But some companies still paint grill marks on their meat or use toothpicks to hold burgers together, pushing the line without technically breaking it.
Now, why do I share those stories with you? Well, the reason is some of you might be here this morning thinking, my life has not turned out exactly like the picture on the menu. I thought I'd be married by now. I thought I'd finish college by now. I thought I'd have a better job by now. I thought we'd have kids by now. I thought we'd have a house, or I'd be better off, or I'd be retired or happier. My life has not turned out the way I thought it would. And that's exactly what we find happening for Joseph as we begin today's episode in his life in Genesis 40. Before we get into that, let me give you a quick recap. Previously in the life of Joseph, we saw that Joseph had a dream of his future. In fact, 2 dreams. In one, all the grain in the fields were bowing down to him, and another, all the stars in the sky. And he was literally the center of the universe. And he took that to mean that one day he would be the head of his family. But that was Genesis 37, and that was the dream. But by the time we reached Genesis 40, Joseph is not only not living the dream, he's sort of living the nightmare. He had told his brothers about his dreams, which was, in hindsight, probably not the wisest thing to do. And his brothers were not thrilled. They did not contribute to his GoFundMe page. In fact, what they did do was they threw him into a pit. They sold him into slavery, where Joseph is taken to Egypt, where he's purchased by a man named Potiphar. There he's falsely accused of rape, and then he is thrown into a prison. And that is where we last left Joseph, alone in prison. And that whole realm of bad events lasts about 13 years, from the time he was about 17 years of age till the time he's about 30. And a question that comes up over and over in his story is, how do I respond when my dream is delayed, or maybe when my dream even seems to die? What am I supposed to do when years and years and years go by and my life does not look like the picture on the menu? Somebody once said the problem is we live in a microwave world and God cooks with a crock pot. Ever feel like that? That's true. But have you noticed that all the good stuff is cooked slowly? I have a friend in our church. I'll see him on Sunday mornings, and usually when I see him and greet him, one of the first questions I'll ask him is, hey, what are you smoking today? Now, people who don't know the context might think that's an unusual question for a pastor to ask a member of his congregation. But those who know the backstory understand that the man I'm talking to is a grill master. He's an expert when it comes to grilling and smoking different meats. And what I've learned from him is that all the best stuff is cooked slowly. Talked to him this week. I asked him how long, for example, it takes to smoke a 3-inch brisket. And he said somewhere between 8 and 12 hours. And certainly the end result of that process is you are left with something delicious. But trust me, nobody's going to mistake it for fast food. Well, Genesis 40, verses 1 to 23. There we read, sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. And we saw a couple of weeks ago, the captain of the guard was a man by the name of Potiphar. And so they are in prison there, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard, Mr. Potiphar, assigned them to Joseph, and Joseph attended them. After they'd been in custody for some time, each of the 2 men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night. And each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there's no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. And as soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup in his hand." "Well, this is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days, and within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here, I've done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." Well, when the chief baker saw that Joseph had given him a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. And within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Now, the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. And he lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he impaled the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. The big idea that I hope you'll take from this story this morning is that even when people forget you, God has not abandoned you. Even when people forget you, God has not abandoned you. During those times of waiting and injustice and silence, God was still at work behind the scenes, working to accomplish his plans, working to fulfill his purpose. And knowing that may not change your circumstances, but it can change the way in which you respond to them. And we see that in the first 8 verses of this 40th chapter. It's there that we see that God gives purpose even in the prison. God gives purpose in the prison. Our text tells us in verse 1 that sometime later, and we don't know how long that was, could be years later, but sometime later, 2 of Pharaoh's staff, his cupbearer and his chief baker, are thrown into the same prison in which Joseph is confined. The reason they're thrown into prison? Well, they defended their master. How exactly they defended their master, we are not told. What we are told is that they are confined in the same prison in which Joseph is confined. We're also told that Joseph was assigned to look after them. At the end of the prior chapter, we read that even before these two were imprisoned, Joseph was not alone in that prison. Genesis 39:20-23 tells us, but while Joseph was there in the prison, he wasn't alone. The Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and Joseph was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care. Why? Because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So Joseph is in charge of all the other prisoners, and that includes these two, Pharaoh's cupbearer and his baker. And Joseph notices something different about these two on this day. Verses 6 and 7 tell us that Joseph saw that they were troubled. They were looking dejected. So he asks them, hey guys, what's up with the face? Why do you look so sad today? Now, on the one hand, it's a strange question to ask. I mean, think about it. They could have told him, Joseph, just a little while ago, we were living in Pharaoh's palace, and now we're stuck here in Potiphar's prison. Of course we're sad. But Joseph could see that this was something more than that. This was something beyond your run-of-the-mill everyday, we're in prison and we don't want to really be here kind of sadness. So they tell him what the problem was. Each of them had a dream, and each of them was troubled by it. Before we get into that, let me mention to you something I don't want you to miss. When these two guys told Joseph that they'd had a couple of bad dreams, it would have been very easy for him to respond by saying, dreams? Bad dreams? Let me tell you something about bad dreams. Let me tell you about the dreams I had and how sharing them caused me to wind up in this prison. Let me tell you how my brothers turned on me, threw me into a pit, sold me into slavery in Egypt, and how even here in this country, although I've done nothing wrong, I still wound up in prison. You guys think you got problems. I'll tell you about problems. Yours are nothing compared to mine. But Joseph didn't do that. Instead, he offered to help them. And therein lies the application for you and me. If, like Joseph, you find yourself trapped in a situation that you did not want to be in, and you've been praying and waiting and praying and waiting and praying and waiting for God to change your situation, the key to remember is keep serving while you're waiting. Keep serving while you're waiting. And that is exactly what Joseph does here. He is waiting. He is looking forward to his eventual release from prison. But he's not so consumed with bitterness and anger about the unfair ways in which he's been treated that he turns all of his attention inward. Instead, while he waits on God to do what only God can do, which is to change his situation, he continues to serve. Look at verse 8. Both the cupbearer and the baker tell Joseph, "We both had dreams, but there's no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." Joseph could have said, "I've got some experience with dreams. Tell me your interpretations and I'll tell you what they mean." But he gave all the credit to God. And this is probably a good place for us to pause for a moment to consider just the idea of God speaking through dreams. Because no doubt what we're looking at here in Genesis 40 is a case of God speaking through the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. And you see that and you wonder, is this something that happens often in the Bible? And the fact is, yeah, you see it a fair amount of time. For example, God spoke through a dream to the pagan ruler Abimelech in Genesis chapter 20 and told him to keep away from Sarah's wife. He spoke through dreams at least twice to Jacob in Genesis 28 and Genesis 31. He spoke through a dream to Jacob's father-in-law Laban in Genesis 31. He spoke through a dream to the Midianite in Judges 7, to Solomon in 1 Kings 3, to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 2, to Daniel in Daniel 7, to Joseph, the adoptive father of Jesus, 2 times in 2 dreams in Matthew 1 and 2, and to Pilate's wife in Matthew 27. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but just a partial one. But what's fascinating about the times that you see God speaking through dreams in the Bible is that God spoke to unbelievers or pagans in dreams almost twice as often as he spoke to his own people in dreams. And I think it's kind of fascinating but not surprising because it helps us to understand that for believers, the focus on hearing from God ought to be through his word. That's where we hear the voice of God. So don't go to bed tonight saying, "Oh, Lord, please speak to me through a dream." You don't see an example of that anywhere in Scripture. If you want God to speak to you, crack open your Bible and ask the Lord to speak to you there, and he will. The writer to the Hebrews 1, 1 and 2 tells us long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways, and when it says in many ways, I've got to believe that includes dreams. Long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors through the prophets, and now in these final days, he's spoken to us through his Son, through Jesus Christ. But here in Genesis 40, we see God speaking through a dream to both the cupbearer and the baker, and as he does that, we'll see that God reveals hope through the process. Hope through the process. The cupbearer is the first one to share his dream. Verse 9 tells us, so the cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in Pharaoh's hand." And he tells Joseph, "This is the dream I had, and then I woke up. I don't know what it means, but I got to believe it means something." And Joseph says, "I've got for you good news. It does mean something, and here's what the dream means. The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you up and restore you to your position as chief cupbearer." Joseph provides him with that interpretation, and it was a message of hope, both for the cupbearer and for Joseph. The cupbearer is hopeful that Joseph is right and that he will be released and restored to the job he had before he was thrown into prison. Joseph is hopeful that when that happens, when the cupbearer is released and restored to his position, that he will remember Joseph and will mention his situation to Pharaoh so that just like the cupbearer, Joseph can also experience freedom. Now, we know it didn't play out that way. We know the cupbearer would be freed, but just as quickly as he's freed, he would forget all about Joseph. But what we need to remember is that God wasn't done with Joseph. We need to remember that sometimes the prison is preparation for the palace. Sometimes the prison is preparation for the palace. You think about the interpretation of that dream that Joseph gave to the cupbearer. And on the one hand, you figure you don't have to be a genius to figure out that it's talking about the cupbearer being restored. But on the other hand, what about those 3 branches representing 3 days. Why 3 days? Why not 3 hours? Or 3 weeks? Or 3 months? Or 3 years? I think it's interesting that Joseph provided an interpretation by which everyone would know whether he was right or wrong with his interpretation within 3 days. And they'd soon see he was right. When the baker heard what the dream meant for the cupbearer, he had to be thinking, oh man, this is great. I can't wait to hear my good news. But sadly, what he was about to hear was anything but. He says, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are again 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. I think you have to give Joseph credit. It would have been very easy for him to say to the baker, you know what? The interpretation of the cupbearer's dream, that was easy. But yours is a little more complicated. Why don't you just give me a little while to kind of ponder it? Joseph didn't do that. He was faithful to deliver the good news and faithful to deliver the bad news as well. And that's an example for you and me. And the chapter concludes by telling us, now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday. And he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. The chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Which leads us to our last point, which is that God remains faithful even when others forget. When Joseph interpreted the cupbearer's dream, he only asked one thing in return, and that was to be remembered. And sadly, no sooner is the cupbearer restored than he forgets all about the plight of the one who helped him. But what we need to remember from Joseph's story is that human disappointment does not equal divine abandonment. We'll see that next week in chapter 40. Or next week as we move out of chapter 40, and we see that this is not the end of Joseph's story. But what you and I need to remember is that God's delays are not God's denials. Genesis 40 ends with Joseph still in prison, still waiting, still forgotten by men. But heaven had not lost his address. God knew exactly where Joseph was. And maybe today that is the word that one of you needs to hear most, because maybe you walked into church this morning feeling forgotten, feeling exhausted, feeling discouraged, feeling disappointed, feeling overlooked. And you've been asking, God, where are you? But Genesis 40 reminds us God is still working even in the waiting. You may not understand the delay. You might not see any reason for it. You may not know why the answer hasn't come yet, but God has not forsaken you. So, don't quit in the prison. Don't give up during the waiting. Don't let disappointment make you feel bitter. Stay faithful, keep serving, keep trusting, because your prison might actually be preparation for something greater than you could possibly ever imagine. The cupbearer forgot Joseph, but God did not. And people may overlook you. People may fail you. People may move on from you. But God sees every tear. He hears every prayer. He notices every act of faithfulness, every lonely moment, every silent struggle. And the God who was with Joseph in prison will be also with you. You may feel forgotten, but know you're not forsaken. Let's look to God in prayer. Would you bow with me? Father, thank you for reminding us today that even when people forget us, you never do. And Lord, I got to believe some people here this morning are hurting. Some are discouraged. Some are waiting on answers. Some feel overlooked, abandoned, or stuck in a difficult situation. But thank you that you're still at work behind the scenes. Help us to trust you during the waiting. Help us to remain faithful in the hard places. Help us to keep on serving even when life seems unfair. Lord, protect us from bitterness. Protect us from the temptation to give up. Protect us from believing the lie that you've abandoned us. And remind us that your timing is always perfect. Just as you were with Joseph in the prison, I pray you'd be with every hurting person in this room today. Strengthen weary hearts, restore hope, renew faith. And for anyone who's never placed their trust in Jesus Christ, may today be the day they surrender their life fully to him. We thank you that because of Jesus, we're never forgotten and never forsaken. We thank you for that in Jesus' name.